Well, today's going to be about how we do our community planning, how the animals are losing out because of human behavior, encroachment on wild terrain. Now, a lot of you guys haven't seen or haven't had perspective because you've never been to Chimpedan, but I'm going to show you how we are surrounded by this problem and the ways and solutions that people are working on trying to face it. So I've got my rifle over my shoulder, I've got my kit on, and I'm on my every other day patrol to give you guys a perspective of where Chimpedan is. It's right there in the background, right over there, and it's my house is right up behind those trees, and this is my trail where I start off on going after checking the fences and heading into the mountains and looking for the animals. It's going to be about an 8 to 10 mile adventure for the day. I have the drone, I'm going to be showing you guys some perspective, and then we're going to have a discussion. That's podcast number 2. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Eugene Cousins here on the second podcast. Bet you guys didn't think I was going to be doing the second one this fast. I think I've got a bit of time. I want to do this on a weekly basis, and I'm going to be pretty busy this next week coming. So I thought I'd just get this one under the belt because it is a pretty good topic to cover, and I think there's going to be a lot of discussion coming from it. I do think that, guys have to keep in mind the reason why I'm doing this podcast is to stimulate the conversation, the dialogue between the various viewpoints. One can almost think of the situation that we're facing right now is that there's two sides to every coin. That's almost how simple it is. You will find people that just have their opinion, and people on the other side, call it right or left or whatever you want to call it. I don't think that topics should be narrowed down to whatever your political influences are. I think that what our ultimate goal needs to be is to identify the problems, and then see how best we can build a bridge from the different viewpoints to a place where we come up with some really good solutions. So today's topic actually hits home quite effectively for me because it's happening in my backyard, and I can show that. And it's just easier for me to try and visually explain something rather than just talking about a topic that I've just read online. Human population growth, human encroachment, those are some pretty big things when it comes to the natural world. If you want to think about the world or the earth as an organism, you got to think that animals, it's not that they're territorial always, but that animals always had the right to be able to move wherever they needed to, and migrate to wherever they needed to as the seasons changed, etc. And the world's changed in such a rapid way that is no longer a possibility. I actually think that the saying, where the saying comes from, that I think it's either barbed wire or wire conquered the West. That's an American saying, not guns, but wire itself. I think it's actually destroyed more of the world than anything else if you think about it. It's given us a way to establish what is ours, what is our private property. But what is the consequence of that? I think, when we started putting up fences, when we started doing our population planning, our land planning, how the world, how we as humans would fit into this world, we start carving it up as private property. Fencing just automatically made that a lot easier, and it made it a lot easier for farmers, especially because they're able to protect their work and protect whatever they're doing, their crops. But mostly if you've got cattle or you're working with livestock, that if you're doing a good job in protecting your livestock, then you shouldn't suffer the consequences of that livestock escaping to your next door neighbor that might not be doing that. So one understands the reason why the benefit would be there for fences going up. But one also has to understand that the consequences of doing that is that the wild populations of animals no longer have the means to migrate. The large majority of animals don't have the means to migrate according to how the seasons would allow, would have, allowed them to do it. And I think we're getting to a point now where at 8 billion people on the planet, we've got to realize that we've got to be a little bit smarter about how we plan our future. Because if we keep on carving up the land into smaller and smaller blocks, then not even the possibility exists anymore to protect or to give enough space for the animals that would have lived there if it was just a little bit larger. So if you, for example, had 1,000 hectares and you decide that it's close enough to a city and you're going to start carving it up into smaller plots, into 10 different smaller plots, and you allow all of them to put up fences, then whatever that land size was going to sustain as far as animals goes, that no longer exists when you start putting up fences, because it's just not enough space, and the animals don't really like fences, and you put them in encampments. It's not really a great idea. It goes against their natural processes, goes against their nature. So let's talk about the changes that's happening. I mean, there's a lot of things to come into consideration. I'm mentioning fences now. I'm mentioning that more and more space is required because of the population growth. But there's a lot of other factors that comes into play as well. And that's where I want to caution people that are purely environmentalists and fighting from a one-sided perspective, or fighting from a one-dimensional perspective. There's geopolitics that comes into play. There's food production that comes into play. There's economic growth that comes into play. If you remove any of these elements because you simply just trying to fix a problem in the way that you think is best, then you might come up short, because if you damage food production, how are you going to sustain the human population? Yes, farming smarter is probably a solution. A lot of places are thinking about how to do that. But I think we need to be realistic as well, that we need to do our planning in such a way that all the variables are taken into account. And I don't think that people are rationally thinking through this all the time when they make statements. There's so we're talking about, I don't want to jump around too much, but we're talking about the human population of the earth now being over 8 billion people. But we also have to consider the fact that there's been measures taken by countries like China where they had the one-child policy. And the damage that came with higher education, it's not just China's ability to bring a large part of their population out of poverty and introduce the one-child policy. It's not just that caused a problem that we're going to get to in a second, but it was also the higher level of education worldwide that has also inputted into the problem that I'm going to mention right now. So if you look at the figures of people or the countries that have raised the education as much as possible, education level as much as possible, and have introduced some form of measures, or have introduced some form of measures. I mean, it's either or, it's not always the same. Then you're looking at situations where, if you're looking at the birth rate right now, it's not sustainable for those populations to continue to exist within a short period of time. We're talking about dates as quickly as 2050, where where the population, the current population, would be considered elderly and retired, and where you had two parents, you now have one child that has to work and take care of not always that the children will take care of their parents, but the fact is that two people are being replaced by one in the workforce. And is that sustainable? Most experts that have actually done the math on this would tell you that that is not a sustainable situation, and you can see direct results of that already kicking in, where some countries are having a hard time filling up their classrooms simply because this next generation that's coming in is much fewer than the previous generation coming into the education system. And therefore, there's a certain amount of infrastructure built, and there's costs that have been undertaken, meaning that people are being employed to teach those children. People are being, all of the jobs that sustain humanity, that's food production, that's education, that's all of those factors have been built to sustain a certain growth rate. And if that suddenly collapses, then we're looking at severe problems for humanity. It's not just as simple as saying that a one-child policy would have solved everything because we would have lowered the amount of humans on Earth. So this is something to think about. I'm not saying I've got no answer to that. I'm just saying that's when you start thinking outside the one-dimensional realm, and you start moving on, thinking multi-dimensional, and taking a whole bunch of variables into account, that you start seeing the bigger picture. One of the subjects that I was really good at university was macroeconomics. So I've got a gift to understand the bigger picture. It's just, I'm fortunate to have had that ability. And so I constantly look at problems. When I see a problem, I think about the bigger influences. I think about the variables. I take a lot more variables into account than just the straight off the bat what you would see. So a one-child policy is obviously not the answer to do that. But I can tell you that when I was younger, I was dumb enough to go along with that narrative to say that, well, human population is out of control. That is our biggest problem, because of traveling to the bad places, traveling to the countries that were experiencing civil strife and war. I really didn't want to bring more children into the world. To be frank, I had my daughter, at least me and my wife, we had our daughter. And for us, that was our family planning, is because why would we want to bring more children into the world that's going to experience a lot more pressures, it's going to experience a lot more civil strife? Just look at what's happening around our neighboring countries. It's not a good picture. And again, it comes back to the first podcast that I was talking about on the hope perspective. If you're hopeless, if you're in a state of hopelessness, then your planning and your the way you live life, how you do it, that's all going to be affected by that. I would have done my life differently. I would have planned my life differently if I had a more positive perspective. And I do blame the people I was listening to at the time. I do blame the personalities that I was involved with, because that was my source of information. And I do blame myself in a lot of ways, because I only saw the negative and I brought that back home, and I made it a negative environment to say to everyone around me that I don't think it's a great idea to keep increasing the population of the planet. Boy, if I just was a little bit smarter when I was younger and not as testosterone action-filled. Anyway, all right, so now we're talking about we don't want society to collapse. We understand we're at 8 billion. It's going to decrease. It's going to flatline. And it's, we're going to sit with a situation already where we can't sustain society as it is currently built. We're talking about solutions that personalities are coming up with and experts are coming up with. And it is incredibly one-dimensional that you can, it's almost like some of these people are moving in the same circles, or they're influenced by the same I can't give you answers to that, but they're influenced by the same information source, whereby they think that if they keep talking in these one-dimensional terms, it's going to be best for their careers. It's a more palatable explanation and message, and therefore it's just going to be popular. It's just going to be more popular to say that's how we deal with it. But there are many other ways to deal with this problem. There are many other ways of thinking about this challenge. It shouldn't be seen as a negative situation. We should be turning this around and thinking from a positive perspective and say, how are what other ways can we come up with to take on this situation? Obviously, my perspective is, I can see the perspective from a social environment angle. I can see how, as the population growth goes up, we do have the challenges of how people interact with one another. Different backgrounds, different religion, different societal factors, all of those things are causing people to come into conflict a lot more. But we are going to have to plan and think about this on how we're going to structure society in a better way and how we're going to manage our land in such a way that it suits a better future for humanity. This is a pretty big way of thinking of it, but it's not as difficult to achieve as one would think. If we had really great leadership within our communities, it would be possible to buy up land and stop. I wouldn't want to say that we would want to remove the ability of people to generate an income through their land. That is absolutely not what my viewpoint is. But what I would say is I would want to do the planning in such a way, well, I think it would work much better if we do our planning in such a way that land doesn't get carved up. There's not an incentive for the land to be carved up into smaller and smaller spaces. And that the benefits of animal migration and animal populations, that is taken more into account. So I'm going to put up an article that you guys can see from that's happening in California, where the authorities are obviously thinking about how they can, I almost want to use the term, resurrect an elk species in that region. And this is a really great example for me to use because there's obviously an incentive that there's leadership where people are thinking about how we can structure land management or manage the land in such a way that a species is taken care of. And it's not just one species that you'll take care of if you manage the land in the right way. But it will have a much broader benefit because if it's one species, that species affects other symbiotic species, etc., etc. If you remove, for example, a rhino out of a rhino from an environment, there's up to 3,000 different little species and other species that of insects, etc., that are influenced with the removal of that species. All right. So by taking this consideration into account of what California is doing, then there would be major benefits with it. But then also what this article is highlighting, this is what I really like, is the fact that this is being highlighted. What do we do with humans? The humans are farming on this land. And I think that the incentive should be there, that the government could say that, well, we could either come up with solutions whereby there are less fences or corridors built. There are a lot of examples of corridors. We'll get to corridors in a second. We manage the land in such a way in partnership with the people that choose to stay and remain there. if that is implemented in the right way in the partnership, then the animals can move freely and the farming can continue at the same time. Now, obviously, if you were going to do your farming plan is to flatten the land and put crops down of corn or whatever else, that's not going to be conducive to as a solution. But there are other forms of livestock farming and or other things that could be done by the landowners that could work with a certain species or certain other natural species of the region that we could conducive to. They can both coexist. That's my point. That's the one solution. The other solution, and this is where I get to corridors, is where you get to certain places where wild corridors are planned as part of population planning. So you would have your farms that are farming with whatever, it doesn't really matter, but it was structured in such a way that the wild corridors exist for the animals to move and migrate from wherever it would be conducive for their survival. I like that idea specifically because it applies to my situation as well. There are conservationists and heroes in my book that are working on getting more and more private land fenced into a larger conservation area, and this thing is snowballing to become hundreds of thousands of hectares, and I'm desperately trying to look at solutions whereby even our land could try and slot into this if we could get close enough to it. So such initiatives would be a landowner that enjoys his land. He doesn't feel the need to want to carve it up. And becoming part of a large conservation area, being slotted into that, gives him benefits of anti-poaching patrols, gives him benefits of ecologists managing the environment and the animal populations, etc. You would have that expertise then coming on board. So those initiatives are fantastic, and it's in my backyard. I can see the benefit of that happening. And I can see the challenges around. I'm going to use the drone footage that I did on the patrol this morning. We'll get to that in a second. But my point is that wild corridors can play an extremely valuable role to ensure wild spaces, the continuation of wild spaces, and the future existence of wild species. All right, so the corridors are a great idea. Then obviously there's the other initiative, which is for those people that don't want to be in partnership with anyone else, that just want to be able to do whatever they want. Would the government be able to give them fair compensation to buy their land back and put that land towards being incorporated into other initiative, as they're talking about in California, or about corridor, or into a corridor? So that again comes down to leadership. If we have the right type of leadership that take these things into account and looks at a situation in a multidimensional way, then these offers could be made. This planning, this societal planning can happen in such a way that everybody benefits. The guy that wants to sell his land into 10 different blocks, or maybe he can get an offer for his land that can get bought back, and that land can play a role where it's part of a natural environment that could eventually be a park that sells tickets, and society can benefit from that. So that is what I'm saying is that there's more than one way to skin a cat. It's a terrible analogy, but I mean, you get the point. More than one way to deal with something. So, I'm coming back to my solution, or not my solution, but my immediate environment right now. For almost a century, my family is trying to keep a piece of land as a natural habitat for the species that live here. And we brought in more animals and more animals to just make the populations sustainable. And we've resisted to try and do any form of development here. Now, when I was a kid, I would stand on the porch of the house and I would look as far as the eye can see. I mean, you can see for 20 kilometers more because it's some very mountainous terrain. And there were no lights. There was nothing. There was nothing here. well, at least when I grew up. Now it's filled with lights, and you can. In a conversation I had with the Parks Board official, he said, Eugene, we would do whatever we can to support you guys to stay a gazetted nature reserve, because if you look at a map at nighttime of your, nighttime aerial view of the city and the surrounding terrain, there's this black blotch that's sitting almost in the middle of all the lights, and that's your piece of land. And we know that's valuable to the animals. Gives me goosebumps to think about other people can actually recognize and understand the value of that, because general population, they don't. They just think that you've got a piece of land and you like your natural space and there's nothing else to it, but there's a lot more to it. This has actually been a mission to try and make this from one generation to the next. I'm the third generation to be on this reserve, to try and keep it as natural as possible, and we have plans to try and build upon that. And Chimp Eden calls it home as well, so I think it's a perfect fit for it. But it takes a lot. It takes a lot out of us to try and protect this, because as people have these little plots go up all around you. And this is humanity. This is where I sometimes I lose my faith in humanity. You can almost say that. Is the need to want to poach, the need to get over a fence, to go shoot something, or put it out a snare or two, because they see your land as prospering with animals and the animal population's growing, and for some reason they want to take a chunk of that. They had no input to it. They have no right to it. They're not part of that mission at all, but they feel entitled to be able to do that, and if they can get away with it. And obviously then there's people like me that stand in between their ability to do that. I'm really proud of the fact that I am a little bit of a feared person for the region and for the neighbors, because I shoot weapons every single day on this reserve. This is where weapons are really important, play a really important role. Your reputation as someone that is active, someone that has got a goal, someone that is protective of his environment, has the ability to stop you from diminishing something. So, how long will I be, and will the other rangers be able to keep on walking in a mountainous terrain? I don't think I can do that forever, but at least in the meantime, that's been kind of like an important factor that has kept poachers at bay. And we've had some really big incidences of potential conflict, if I can put it that way. It's a nice way of putting it. All right, so let's get into it. Now there's lights all around this little reserve, and I've got to think about the future. My family's got to think about the future of protecting this land and keeping it wild, and we're slotting that into a corridor, getting rid of fences. Those are all options on the table to consider. And obviously, policing will never go away, because human nature, you can't account for, and you should never think about the fact that people will always be good-hearted and appreciate what you have. There will be the individuals that just wants to take a chance and diminish what you're doing. So I think that those factors play hand in hand. Policing combined with good planning, good infrastructure. That is the way to be able to manage this specific situation. Now, when I did a patrol this morning, I walked a section, because you can't, something take you a whole day to try and accomplish walking even close to all of the fences on a place like this. So I got to walk for about 3.5 hours now. I took some drone footage, which I'm gonna put up now, and you guys can see, as I'm flying along a certain part of fence line, how my focus has to be all those houses going up next to my reserve fence. I've now got to plan and check that fencing, and I've got to try and make sure that there are, what kind of tracks are leading up to the fencing. And I have to do that with aerial patrols using paramotors, which are a very effective tool. And I've got to do physical patrols as well. And I've got to make sure that there is a line of defense. That's what we call that front line, is to be able to be that element to stop anyone else from being nefarious. Okay, so I hope that makes, you're going to watch this clip. Actually, I'm going to stop here while you guys watch me actually, I can put my voice over the footage. You guys can see a little bit what I'm talking about. What else is important about this topic? So I think we've covered human population growth and the fact that the one-child policy was not an answer, and I was a victim to it as well. Although I can say one positive thing that came from it. I am very proud to talk about my daughter being someone that is incredibly intelligent. Well, besides that, she's a unicorn. She's a 10 out of 10 in my book. I mean, all parents would say that, wouldn't they? But I think she is. Her name is Haley. And when the series came out, I was actually stuck in Sudan trying to rescue a whole bunch of chimps. We're going to talk about that story later on. But my daughter was going to be born, and I might have missed her birth because I was stuck rescuing chimpanzees in Sudan. And one of the big promises I made was that I would be there as much as I possibly can. And this is how it worked out. When the show got cancelled and I retired from Chimp Eden, that's pretty much what I did. I was the dad that took her to every single hockey game, to every single athletic challenge, and she was just one of those kids that did everything at state level. She would run at state level. She would do her team sports at state level, and academics just incredible. So my daughter is going to study next year. She has to do a double engineering degree, the most difficult engineering sciences that one can get. She's going to do two engineering degrees at the same time, which is just giving me goosebumps and think about how intelligent this girl came out of the oven, and hopefully I had something to do with that. But that's the generation. I might have had one kid, but I do believe I did a good job. And so some of us that did the one-child policy, even though it was self-inflicted, maybe we can pride ourselves in the fact that we did a good job. But I would say that the matter needs to be well researched by everyone that's on this group. Think about human population growth. Think about how that affects society in the future as we are marching towards statistics that you could research. You can find it all by yourself. You can see that it's going to be, it's dipping below 2% growth, some places below 1%. And that is not a good future for us. So you can look at those figures, and that will open up your horizon at looking at the challenge. Then we can look at, you can do research in your communities, not your immediate environment, because that is the core principle of this podcast. Is I'm always driving community-driven messaging. I'm trying to find a solution within my community, and so should you be looking at your community. Is there an influence of is this a factor within your community, city planning, town planning, the environment around your city? We're going to talk about deforestation as one of those big factors in a future podcast, another heavily laden topic. Like I said, I've got bags full of them, so we are going to go over all of them. So this is going to be, just focused on human encroachment and the human population problems. Redo your research on it. Come to your own conclusions, and let's maybe pick this up in a future podcast where we've had enough time to go over the data and see if we can find some bridges and see if if I'm full of shit or not on my opinion on this, or whether I'm swaying you to understand the challenges that we are facing. And if you believe something completely different, I think there's something there that we need to get together on. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the podcast number 2. I'll put in some extra footage of where I was doing the patrols, and just if you find it interesting or not. yeah, let's keep this going. I'll see you guys on podcast 3. I'm just out of interest sake, I am working on the Apple podcast to try and get this listed up on that as well. Finding that a little bit hard to do. So for now, I'm still asking guys to join the YouTube subscription and to join the subscription on the Facebook page. The Facebook page right now has got the momentum of more than 12,000 people, and it's growing. I can see that growth coming into it. If you join that as a paid subscription, then we have something to build on. It actually looks like we are moving upwards with that, and that makes sense then to keep the podcast kick it into a higher gear. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'll be seeing you on the third one.
It's kind of like a perspective of what it'd be like to walk the patrol and reserve, and don't want to make too much noise and walk off the beaten tracks, or maybe just the game trails, because that's the most obvious places that snares would be put up. It's not where humans would traverse or where the animals would, so it's tough going in that sense. And then when you do get to sections of the fence that you know is vulnerable, that you spotted out from a flying patrol, which is different from this obviously, then you gotta go check them out as well, see how they link up. Alright, back later. There we go, some of my Blesbok friends, 2 youngsters, 1-year-old. And they are some of the most vulnerable here, simply because they stick to specific terrain, and because of that, our specific area, territorial, because of that the poachers know where to get them. It's a frequent area that I got to pass through. Now on a hunting farm you would never ever see anything like this, simply because the animals are afraid of people. But here where we are, this is about 40 feet. They're as happy as a clam. Just as much, they need to respect me just as much as they need to, which means they won't walk up to me, but eat out of my hand, which is exactly what you want. You want them to be wild, but not be afraid of humans. Alright, on we go. It's always around the halfway mark that start melting. 33 degrees Celsius. Now it's about getting back in time and not dehydrating, but part of the fun. Not complaining. I'm out in the bush, getting to see animals, and not picking up on any problems. Adios.